Hello!
Hello.
Welcome to the LIVEcast.
Yes, indeed. Hopefully.
Yes. I think we're there. Do give us a shout if you are on Facebook and can comment and say hello. We love to hear comments from viewers, especially today because we're talking about politics and left and right.
Yes, and a good and in no way divisive topic.
No, even the way that we frame it, left and right. And,
you're either on this side or that side.
That's right.
The way it is.
You're with us and the good people, or you're over there with the scumbags.
Yeah, totally.
That's the way we're gonna frame things for you. So because we're so helpfully uniting as a force, we believe. Speak Life. I'm Glen Scrivener, by the way. Hello, and that's what's his face? The Feesonator.
The Feesonator. Yeah, that's what they call me. Yeah. Sent from the future to
Paul Feasy, one of Cobra's finest. Yeah. And we haven't got a monologue for you today. Sorry about that. But pretty much all the monologues we ever do on this kind of subject, actually. I've done quite a few monologues about the issue of left and right. So I remember one about the power of the sword. In the States, the power of the sword is the power of the gun.
Sure.
And so the NRA is an expression of the power of the sword in the States, whereas in the UK, the NHS is an example of the sword and the state. And we'll be thinking about all those sorts of things. Roger Marshall says hello. Hello, Roger Marshall. Ian McCarthy says good afternoon. Ben Virgo says Glen's on the right. Wow. As far as I'm concerned, I'm on the left here, so I don't know.
Yeah, we flip this image round. So.
Yeah. So I will. Why don't I argue the right wing case? You argue the left wing case. Should we do that as we go?
That may be difficult. Go on then. Let's give it a go.
Steel man. Should we steel man? So, what am I? I'm the left. I'm the left.
I thought you said you were the right.
I'm on the right, so I'm on their right. I'm on my left. I'm on their right. Right, so
I think whatever it is, we're both desperately confused.
We are.
Wherever we are. So.
Does anyone know why we're talking about this yet? We haven't really introduced.
Probably not, no. We've
last
been
night,
steeped in it. So.
Yes, we have. Last night, we did a video where I discussed Candace Owens' interview with Russell Brand. Russell Brand had Candace Owens on his show, and it was a tremendous 2 hours of sparky, lively, fiery, fun debate.
Yeah, it's a proper laugh.
It is a proper laugh.
It's great fun.
Yes.
They both have completely opposing views on things.
Right.
Well, not necessarily entirely. Sometimes there's some common ground, and sometimes I think they're speaking the same language, but mostly I don't think Russell necessarily thinks they're speaking the same language. Sometimes Candace kind of says, we are saying the same thing here.
Yes.
But yeah, it's great fun.
Russell changes sides quite often without realising it.
Changes like
in the same sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. Is he an anarchist? Is he a socialist?
Right. Does
he want the government to intervene, or does he want the government to disappear entirely?
Yes. And I think that's one of the limitations of the left-right spectrum, as though that captures the entirety of politics, is that actually on the left you could be an anarchist or a socialist, and actually those two options are really miles apart.
A little bit different, yeah.
And they have vastly different views of the state and the scope of the state and things like that. So even as we start talking about left and right, we are very aware that there are all sorts of other spectra. Did you notice that I used the correct plural there? Spectra, not spectrums. Only proles say spectrums. I say spectra.
They're the baddies in James Bond, aren't they?
Spectra, yeah. And wasn't it a computer? Was there a Commodore 64? No, there was a
Spectrum.
Yeah, I know. Anyway. So there are many different spectra, people. They're spectra.
Multiple spectrum. Try.
So there's not just left, right, but there's also globalists versus nationalists. There's also people who think they're from everywhere and people who think they're from somewhere. Globalist and nationalist, or there's authoritarian and non-authoritarian. There's populist, non-populist. There's all sorts of different axes that people could line up on. So we're very aware that left...
Axi, maybe?
Axes, I think.
I'm sure you're right.
I'm nailing the plurals today. I'm nailing them. So there are all sorts of different spectra that people can line up on, and left and right is quite a limiting one. And actually, what some people think of as left and what some people think of as right will change depending on the culture that you're in. So that you might think of yourself as on the right in the UK, and like an American might look at you and call you a communist, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Go back to Moscow.
Basically, from my understanding, if you think the NHS is good,
yes,
to an American, you're basically a communist.
Socialized healthcare.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
But then
right.
doesn't Jordan Peterson talk about, he said, if you're on like the far, he talks about the left, he talks about those on the far left. He says even if you are kind of just centre left, to those on the far left, you may as well be an extreme right winger.
Yes.
You know, so anyone slightly further the other way than you,
yes,
is miles the other way as far as you're concerned.
Yes.
So they don't see that distinction. And Brand actually, he says, doesn't he, that between a lot of these positions, he said, you know, whether you're on the left or the right, he sees them as being much of a muchness.
Part of the same
He
system.
talks about, was it Breitbart and MSNBC? Was
right.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he says, really,
Right.
the differences between them are so minimal.
And I think it's true, and especially if you try to think about it as pure ideology, if you just have a pure ideology about the scope of the state or the place of the individual in politics and that kind of thing, you could get two people going hammer and tongs at one another at a debate. You like imagine a debate between Turning Points USA and, you know, some speaker from the Young Turks or something on a campus in the States, and they could be going at one another hammer and tongs about, you know, don't tread on me, and no, we're all socially constructed, and back and forth it could go. But actually they will leave that debate and they will lead identical lives. You know, they will both be watching the same programs on Netflix.
Yep.
They will be both shopping in the same places. Their whole world will be constructed in almost identical ways, and their lifestyles will not alter a bit, but they think they are on totally opposite, you know, sides of the spectrum.
It's a bit like that old, there's the joke, isn't there, about the two Baptists, isn't it, who meet.
Oh yeah,
like
yeah,
on the
yeah.
fridge, and he's like, "What kind of Baptist are you?" And they're the same, and they keep going down this list, and they get to the last one. He's, you know, Reformed Baptist of what year? And he says, "Oh, this one." He's like, "Oh, die, heretic!" And like pushes him off. You know, even though it's like the smallest difference.
Right. And when it comes down to ideology, isn't it interesting that, you know, we think that left and right is this massive like divide, and yet we live similar lifestyles. Whereas, like, I would say that the truly different, those who are truly living radically according to their ideology, would be, you know, various conservative religious communities who buck, you know, the trend of, you know, modern life. Or you would think about, you know, a vegan or an environmentalist who has taken like radical steps to alter the way they live in accordance with their ideology. And then at that stage, you're talking about proper differences.
Yeah.
But I think Russell's point when he says that actually between Breitbart and MSNBC, they're all part of the same system, I think he's pointing to that kind of truth, that actually you might have this ideology about the place of the individual in society, but if it doesn't make a difference to your entire spiritual outlook on life and the way that you actually live, what's the point of it?
Yeah.
So as an introduction, Jonathan Dunn says, "Hi Glenn." Hello, Jonathan. And he says libertarian.
Hi, I'm here too.
Yeah.
It's all right.
We have history, though. We have history. We've done a YouTube chat, you see.
Oh, I see.
Yes,
Fair enough. Let you off this time.
Fair enough. But yes, I'm glad to see you on here. He says libertarian is the antonym to authoritarian. Yeah, and obviously, when you say sort of left and right, you know, libertarians or classical liberals kind of think, you know, they sort of stand above the fray. And we'll think about libertarians in a minute, and we'll think about anarchists as well, who aren't necessarily captured by this
Sure.
little heuristic, shall we call it, of left and right. But here we go. Should we dive in and have a look at the beginning of last night's video and introduce you to Candace Owens and Russell Brand in case you don't know who they are?
Here we go.
Russell Brand and Candace Owens discussing left and right in politics was everything you might have hoped for. In a word, it was sparky, but I think sparky in the right kind of way. Russell was on his cheeky, chappy, cockney geezer charm offensive, and Candace did her fiery, take no prisoners, woman with attitude thing. But actually it reminded me of so many of the fights that I've had with my sisters growing up. I used to love just sort of winding them up, and I think Russell plays big brother to Candace's little sis, and that approach beautifully handles the situation, and it takes what could have been purely oppositional into a really fruitful conversational context. So I thought Russell Brand did a brilliant job in this interview. Therefore, instead of this, like when Candace debated the left-winger Eric Michael Dyson...
Using big words here to say nothing.
What you're saying here, so now what happens to black America happens to you, so black people are reduced to what, can you...
Instead, it was like this.
Comfortable.
We're not leaving until we agree on absolutely everything. Candace. then we'll
until
leave.
I have you in a MAGA hat.
I'm wearing it already, but just down my trousers.
Yeah. Oh, very nice.
There were so many funny moments, and well done, Russell, for making this a truly enjoyable, and I'm going to say it again, sparky conversation.
Sparky. You
It was.
like that word. You used it a few times
sparky.
last night, didn't
Yeah.
you?
Fiery and fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good fun. It's a laugh. It was an enjoyable thing to watch, I think.
Yeah, and I think because of Russell, I think if it was Candace's show on Candace's terms, I think that'd be fun, but not quite as much as Russell had.
Yeah, well, he's quite off the wall, isn't he?
He's impish.
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
He? Yes.
I know. I quite like Russell Brand. I mean, I know a lot of people who just slam him.
Yeah.
But I think I do like him.
I've come to like him a lot, especially since reading Recovery, his book about the 12 steps. So, as we'll get into, he is a recovering addict, so crack and heroin, and he's been almost like 15 years clean, something like that. So, but the 12 steps have been a massive thing in his life, and the 12 steps are obviously incredibly Christian. They founded by two guys in the basement of a church in New York, and it begins by saying, step one is we came to see that our lives were unmanageable and that we had no power over ourselves, and we gave ourselves up to a higher power and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of the Christian the Christian shape to it is like front and center. The Christian name is kind of anonymized. You deal with a higher power. You don't really deal with Jesus.
Yeah.
But Russell is like into his Bible. He reads his Bible, prays to Jesus, prays the Lord's Prayer. In the interview with Candace Owens, he says, remember what our Lord said.
Yeah.
Forgive them, Father, they don't know what they're doing. And infinite love, the infinite love of our Lord. So he's really interesting, and he's been on a journey. And I think one of the things I do in the video last night is sort of take people through the prodigal son. The prodigal son is a little bit like left wing and right wing. You've got these two children. One of them is one of them says, "Don't tell me what to do ethically," right? And runs off and has fun, gets lost. He thinks life is a blast and actually ends up in a pigsty, and he needs redeeming and he needs to be saved. And then the older brother, ethically speaking, he's the good guy, and he's the hard worker, and he's all about respect and tradition and authority. And he remains at home, and he remains furious that the younger brother has been welcomed by the father. And so I do see a similarity between left and right there in terms of younger brother left and older brother right. And I do see definitely a similarity personality-wise between Russell Brand, who definitely did go for,
Yeah, he's definitely the prodigal.
Prodigal. And who has discovered spirituality and has discovered, something that has delivered him from the pit.
Yeah, something out. He certainly thinks there needs to be something outside of him,
right,
that brings him back.
Right. Whereas Candace, very much self-help.
Yeah, totally, and she's very much got an attitude, or she says a few things through it, doesn't she, about how she's kind of self-made and she got out there herself, and I helped myself, that kind of thing. Which we were talking about earlier and saying there's an element of truth to that, obviously, in that she's worked hard to get where she is, but no one is completely self-made. It's complete nonsense, isn't it?
Right.
I think that no one ever gave you a break, no one ever helped you, that you never went to school, no one ever taught you anything, all those kind of things.
Right.
Everything plays in. The idea that you're this autonomous island away from everything is a complete fairy tale, really, isn't it? Right.
But we'll see that if that's the world that you live in, then if you're on the right, you start to raise up the individual, and that's your big thing. And if you're on the left, you sort of raise up the collective and the community and society and government and the state. and so we'll think about how personality types really play into where you line up, left or right. And actually, I've got this Peterson clip where he talks about temperament, and it is really interesting to think that while you might imagine that your political ideology is really thought through from first principles because, you've read widely in political philosophy, no, it largely goes toward your temperament. And Peterson will explain how your temperament kind of nudges you towards left or right wing.
If you're not bit of your political preference is determined by your biological temperament. It's strongly influenced. So if you're a creative type who's kind of disorderly, then you're likely to be on the liberal left end of the distribution. And if you're a non-creative type who's orderly and especially if you're orderly, then you tend to be on the right wing end of.
So if you are orderly and you are not open in personality terms, you're on the right. If you are disorderly, if you're not orderly, but you are open and a creative type, then you tend to skew left. And there's all sorts of other things that this is not to say that everybody who is male goes right, but there are more men who go right than women, and there's more women than men who go left.
Sure.
The older you get, the further to the right you tend to go, and this is not to say, my great grandfather was as left, he was a communist and blah, blah, blah. We understand, but it is interesting that personality type really does, play into this kind of stuff. And I think that's very worth being aware of, especially in a culture where we are about to tear each other apart over politics. Just to realize that actually your brain was kind of probably wired the way that you think is the right way, Yeah. And it was, and therefore let's cut each other some slack. And actually maybe it's the case that we need one another, right? Maybe we need people who are open on the left, and maybe we need people who are orderly on the right. And maybe the people who are open are the ones who have the great entrepreneurial ideas, and maybe the people on the right actually help them to put it into
make
effect
it happen.
and make it happen and make it sustainable.
That's funny. I can think of a situation, and I will not name any names. I have a fear of identification, but I can totally think of some people I know and have spent time with who come up with amazing ideas, and then you say, "Thank you very much. Please step away from the ideas now, and let us detail people do this, okay? Because it's probably not good if you do this."
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. So it is worth thinking that temperament plays a big part in this. And so should we have a look at a little table? I've done up a couple of tables about left and right that we might be able to talk through.
Hopefully this is the right one first. Is it that one?
That one, right.
Yes. Brilliant.
So I don't know if you know the sort of the etymology of left and right. Like, why do we start thinking of things in these terms? And back in the French Revolution, those who were to the left of the king were for revolution, and those who were to the right were for the monarchy. And so it's come to mean that those on the left are far more for change, and those on the right are far more for the status quo. And as soon as you say that, you're like, well, who's right? Who's right? Is it always right to change, or is it always right to keep things at the status quo? And the answer is there's no one-size-fits-all answer. So please, can we stop hunkering down and insisting that our side is right? We've got a great quote from a great clip from Jordan Peterson, who sort of talks about there is a benefit to being on the right if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know how the world operates, and if you have very little, just stay the same. Just stay the same. So yeah, he says this in a recent debate from last year.
Okay.
If you're not exceptionally cognitively astute, you should be traditional and conservative, because if you are if you can't think well, you're going to think badly. And if you think badly, you're going to fall into trouble. And so it is definitely the case, and this has been what would you call a cliche of political belief for a long time. If you're not very smart, it's better to be conservative, because then you do what everyone else does. And generally speaking, doing what everyone else does is the path of least error moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean that rationality is unnecessary.
Nor does it mean that all conservatives are stupid.
It doesn't mean that either. Right, precisely. It doesn't mean
very
that either.
important caveat.
Yes,
So it kind of it goes to the point of what is the right thing to do in anyone's situation, and very often the right thing to do is let's keep things ticking along. But also, systems can become tyrannical, and systems can break down, and things need to change, and things need to progress.
Yeah, I mean, we've all rallied against the kind of cry of, this is the way it's always been, you know. That doesn't mean it should still be that way.
Right.
Other times,
Right.
yeah, it's good to maintain that status quo, isn't it?
So, left and right, perhaps we need each other, right? we certainly need some measure of conservatism and some measure of progress. We always need that moving forward. So we are not enemies of one another. The next thing on the table is a sense of where you find your identity. Do you find your identity in the one, right? In a kind of a unity with loads of others that you all share this one, this oneness with, or do you find your identity in being different, distinct, particular? That kind of works itself out as on the left you have a more social identity that is more to do with maybe your class or your ethnicity or gender, or you identify with a collective, and on the right you identify as an individual, right? And actually what's interesting about that is, going back in the history of philosophy, that this has almost been like the most debated question in 2,500 years of philosophy is, what is most ultimate, the one or the many? Are we all kind of really the same, and actually all our differences are just surface level? Or are we actually really, really different from one another, and any attempt to corral us into a greater identity is kind of forcing us against our temperament? And again, like, what is the answer to that? You know, is it that we are one, or is it that we are distinct individuals? And you're like, you know, kind of yes, you know, like what?
Well, that's the thing, is as you're kind of going through those and saying, you know, on the left it's more as the group, and on the right more the individual. And I mean, you kind of think, yeah, but it maybe comes back to Brand's stuff about how much difference is there really, because when I think more about the left, I tend to think of those who are more caught up in the individual, whereas the right seems to me more, let's think about the social whole, you know, like the society as a whole, whereas the left is more about individual, like express yourself as an individual. And so although there is that, but within that there are those groups. There are the groups, you know, I'm part of this community or that community, the vegan community or whatever it is. But it seems like there's a huge emphasis on the individual doing what they want.
Yes.
So
yeah,
it's hard to.
Yeah.
Like, how far apart are they?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. Not very. Not very. But we kind of need each other, and we need the one and the many, and So one of my favorite books, like ever, is Colin Gutton's book, The One, the Three, and the Many, and he kind of talks about the history of Western philosophy as the history of this debate between, are we all one, or are we all distinct and individual, the many? And he kind of says the whole way along, you know what, the Christian doctrine of the Trinity is this answer that's been neglected. And when we depart from Trinitarian theology, we either skew one way or the other. We either kind of smush each other together in a unity that doesn't really work, or we all scatter apart as these individuals. But actually in the Trinity, you've got particular distinct persons who are united together in love. And actually, with the triune God, he offers you a community in the church that's kind of modeled on his own way of being, in which we are distinct, particular, persons who actually find our identity not by insisting on our own independence, but by actually living for others. And so I am one member in a body, and you're one member in the body, and we need one another, but we're distinct members of the body, but we're united together. And so again, I think is the one more important? Is the distinction more important? Actually, yes, but here is the gospel, and the gospel might have an answer to the issue of the one and the many. Should we move on to the next one?
Next table.
The next...
next one on the table.
Next one on the table. So, and this is part of what you were kind of referring to there, on the left and on the right, because the left and the right say different things when it comes to ethics or economics. So on the left... On the issue of ethics, the left tends to say, leave me alone. I'll do what I want to do.
Let me be what I want to be and do what I want to do.
Right, which is what the younger brother says, right? But on economics, they say, let's honour the community.
Sure.
We're all in this together, and let's make sure we have a safety net.
Yep.
So on ethics, they say, leave me alone. On economics, they say, honour the community. And the right flips that around, and the right says, on ethics, let's honour the community. But on economics, they say, leave me alone. Don't tread on me, which is, in the American Revolution, as they fought against the Brits, the Americans, flew the flag that said, don't tread on me, right? Leave me the heck alone. And that's a typical kind of right-wing sentiment.
Yep.
And of course, libertarians just say, leave me alone on all things, right? As do anarchists. But again, there's a time when actually ethically I don't want the community to have its nose in all my business all the time, right? And as I form, my family in an ethical way, I want her to be formed for the community, and so that the community has a role, but it doesn't have every role, and the same way with economics, leave me the heck alone to get on with what I want to get on with. But why shouldn't I pay for roads, and why shouldn't I pay for education, and why shouldn't I pay for these sorts of things? So again, these are emphases that right and left bring. Hopefully they can be mutually informing and mutually beneficial, you would hope. But we're not like that. We're tribal people, aren't we? We're tribal, and we are right and they are wrong, and so it leads to punch-ups. So that's on sort of ethics and economics. But I think on the next table, this is where it gets really interesting and where things have really developed. I think on the left, the victim is sacrosanct, and on the right, the achiever is sacrosanct. Okay, and what I mean by that is on the left, if it's all about society has formed me and my identity is really found in the greater whole, then you can look around at society and you can see that some people are doing better than others, and there's inequality, and so like, whose fault is it that someone is not doing as well? Someone on the right will say it's the individual's fault, right? And if you're an individualist, then you say, well, you either pull yourself up by your bootstraps or you're a loser. On the right, though, they say, oh, no, but I'm a victim of larger forces and systemic injustice and all that kind of stuff. And so there is the victim is sacrosanct on the left, and we'll see a clip in a second of Candace Owens talking about the oppression Olympics, where we all try to compete with one another as to who's the most oppressed. Whereas on the right, it's that... well, forget about systems. There's no systemic injustice. It's just down to you. And if you haven't pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, it's on you, buddy. And both of them are mythologies, I think. And both of them are, get things wrong. But I think we are seeing the oppression Olympics a lot these days, don't you think?
Oh yeah, definitely, totally.
The claiming of victim status in all things. But actually, I do think that is very much a Christian legacy that we've given to the West. That actually, before Christianity hit, everyone in the first century was wandering around saying, along with Russell Crowe in The Gladiator, strength and honor, strength and honor, strength and honor. That's what you build your society on. That's what every society ever has been built on. And then Christianity comes along, and we've got a victim at the heart of it. Like, literally, Jesus is the victim. Like when John the Baptist says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." He is a sacrificial victim. And the word victim kind of, it's used in the language of the cult and the sacrifice, that the lamb was the victim that died instead of you. And so we've got a victim at the heart of our, gospel. And actually Christians have always stood up, therefore, for the little guy and for the marginalized and the oppressed and the victims, in a way that other cultures just really didn't. And Nietzsche hated that. Nietzsche was like, this, slave religion of Christianity. They're always standing up for the little guy. You should let the little guy perish, for goodness sakes. And we need to be these Ubermensch, these supermen who rise above the victim, But Christianity's always been about victims. And so, so we introduced that to Western culture, but now it's just become this thing all by itself, that the victim is to be sacrosanct and protected and lifted up and divorced from any other consideration. And one of the chief other considerations you should have is that, let's properly identify who really are victims, and let's not do it according to just a very narrow range of attributes like your race and gender and sexuality.
Yeah.
Maybe there are other victims of oppression, and maybe it's important, rather than for me to compete to try to be the victim, maybe it's important for me to actually be the compassionate, strong, wise person who can help true victims. But if I'm always trying to be the victim, then no one gets ahead in society.
Sure.
But if I'm trying to be, the sort of strong person who wants to help the victim, that starts to be a society that can flourish. But should we see Candace Owens lay her boot into the oppression Olympics?
Yeah, we'll give it a go.
It's quite fun.
We'll see if we can.
Oh, let's see if the volume works on this. Let's see.
Okay, let's.
To greater goals than simply fulfilling a predetermined economic role. But worshipping continually at the altar of finance. We must do better.
And you think I worship finance?
We must look for a better solution. I don't know if you do. You believe in God, right? And what is a belief in God if it's not?
Missing out.
Not working. Volume's not coming through.
Come on, do your best Candace Owens impression. Go on. Go on. What was she saying?
No, because there's lots of crazy people out there, and it'll be all over the internet before I know it. Like,
she wouldn't mind.
Straight white man
culturally
does impression of black woman.
Yeah.
Like,
the one woman who wouldn't mind would be Candace Owens herself.
That's true. I mean, the brand, doesn't he apologise at some point for calling her love? And she's like, what kind of person would look at this discussion and pull out that you called me love? Seriously.
Yeah.
She's like, people who can't even bear someone to hold open doors for them.
Right. So, but okay, in your own words, then, Paul. What is the Oppression Olympics?
The Oppression Olympics. So it's this idea. So she says, to Rand, here's this Oppression Olympics. So it goes like this. Well, he's a bloke, she's a woman. As a woman, I'm more oppressed than you, so therefore I'm one up. I'm more of a victim than
1-0.
One ding. And then she's like, and I'm also black, and you're white, so ding.
2-0.
2-0. Yeah, whatever. And I suppose she says, I suppose the most I could be if I was a kind of a female. Black, disabled, gay woman,
right?
Female and woman are the same thing.
Yeah. Perhaps trans woman then.
Trans woman, that's the only one she didn't mention. That would have really trumped kind of everything.
Yeah.
So she said, so there you go. There, how am I you're the ultimate victim if you can keep playing all these cards out and say, but look, I'm also a part of this oppressed group, and I'm part of this oppressed group, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And there is an element of that in the world, isn't there?
Right.
I won't say an element. There's.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a massive.
Yeah.
Amount of it.
Right.
At the moment, and she's very much she pushes against that narrative. So she's fascinating when she talks about race itself, because she just kind of says she says black people in America have been sold a kind of lie, really, that they're that they are now this oppressed group. And she says basically you're being kept down by that kind of thing. And it's worth hearing what she says on it. It's fascinating to see. I mean, what's the conversation she talks about where she says, so people get angry with her for saying that the Guardian got angry with her for saying that black people don't need handouts,
right?
And but that she was saying, so the Guardian are angry with me because I'm saying black people can do it by themselves and black people aren't oppressed. So what they're implying is, no, black people can't do it by themselves and they do need handouts.
Yes.
And she's saying, and I'm the racist, supposedly.
Right. Right.
So it's fascinating. And I was telling you earlier about a conversation I'd seen her in on a news program, and the presenter asked her about, was she worried about representation of black people in the White House, and she was like, why would you ask me about that?
Why would you ask me about that?
Why would you ask me?
Right.
She's like, why? She's like, are you worried about the representation of white people in the White House? It's such a why do you ask me a question about race simply because I'm black?
Is it because I was black?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this woman gets really het up about it. She's like, oh, you're calling me a racist. She's like, I didn't say that. You put those words, those words came out of your mouth, and like, So it's fascinating to behold, and I think she's an interesting character in that respect.
Is. And then, Russell comes back at it, and he does say, well, look, aren't there systemic injustices, and aren't there obstacles in the way of people if they do happen to be a woman and black and lesbian and all these sorts of things? And I think on the left, they are much more comfortable with calling out systemic sin and endemic sin and society-wide sin, and calling whole systems to repentance, whereas those on the right are, well, we label individual sins, and if an individual has broken the law, then you bring the full weight of the law down on that sucker, and they're going down, right? But how do you hold a system to account, right? And so,
well, that's Shapiro's thing, isn't it? So he always says, like, show me an instance of X, Y, or Z, and I will fight you. I'll fight that cause with you. Yes. But if you just say to me, there is this institutionalized X, whatever it might be. Yeah. He said, you can't. What do you do? Right. Show me specific cases, and we can take down specific cases. Right. Right.
But I do think both sides have a point. Ian McCarthy has said lost broadcast. Well, if anyone else has lost broadcast, then you won't be able to tell me that you've lost broadcast. I realise that now. But
we're still having fun.
Hope it's all okay for you, Ian. But I think both sides have a point. I think surely there's such a thing as let's say, in conservative evangelical churches, let's imagine that there is a massive bias towards middle-class people. Let's imagine.
Hang on.
Imagine
a
world.
To put myself in that position for a second. Yep,
Ian is back. I'm glad you're back, Ian. And Bill Lavelle, all the way from the US, is still coming through here in the US. Hey.
Over his coffee in the morning.
It is. I bet he's got a 50-inch screen to watch us on. Everything's bigger in Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas.
Good job we're in low resolution.
Yeah, very fuzzy. But okay, let's imagine you live in a world in which there are churches that are, overwhelmingly middle class.
Okay.
And let's say that, working class people don't feel like they could fit or belong, and but it's not anything. You can't point to any particular middle class individual in any of those churches. They're not, in a sense, they're not doing any individual thing
not
wrong.
Doing a particular wrong thing. No,
but maybe there are systems in place that make people feel underrepresented, and therefore like they don't belong, and therefore there might be some kind of cultural repositioning of things that need to happen. And maybe in the state, and if church is divided on class grounds in England, it's divided on racial grounds in the States a lot more. Maybe there are things, and it's not that any individual is doing something racist in a church, but maybe there are systems in place that, a black person comes into a white church and they don't see any other people who look like them, and they therefore don't feel like they belong, and there might just be cultural things that... And so, and so the left is very sensitive to that, and I think it's important to be sensitive to that, just as it's important to be sensitive to the individual sins and
But I there's definitely that thing of how much can you do about it.
Right.
To some extent.
Yeah.
No, I mean on different.
You
issues.
would say that as a white cisgendered privileged man.
But what I mean is, so putting it in the church context. So you're saying where people aren't doing anything inherently wrong, but that's just the way they are. So I would say, like when I first started working, like where I was at All Saints, and I was moving into this kind of, there was this conservative evangelical circle, not specifically at All Saints, but wider than that. When you'd go to things, I discovered that lots of conservative evangelicals who seemed to be in the circles I was getting pushed around were Oxbridge and Cambridge privately educated.
Right.
And it felt like a bit of an old boys club.
Right.
And I mean, they weren't doing anything wrong.
Right.
But I was just like,
right.
I didn't feel welcome in that culture.
Right.
I don't feel, but I can't point at them and say, you did this. It's just like, we're different. This isn't my culture.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
I don't know what it is about it specifically.
But wouldn't you, in that, so they really do have privilege, right? Yeah. And so that language of privilege, isn't it appropriate for them to be, well, you don't want to force them to use their privilege in order to serve those who don't have their privilege, but you would want people to
be aware of it,
to be aware of their privilege and to use their privilege in order to raise others up and to limit their own freedoms in order for others to enjoy more. So that language on the left kind of makes sense in that situation, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, but hard
I'm
to
trying,
know.
people. I'm trying to move him away
hard
from
to
the...
know, like what you could have what specifically on the ground you could do.
Yeah.
So I mean, so in principle, yes.
Yeah.
But practically,
yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
That's more difficult.
Yeah.
But that would differ for every situation.
Yeah.
Whatever. So how does the working class person, or how does the middle class person, what do they do in their church to make a working class person feel welcome? And even for me, that rankles because part of me thinks like, you want to make that person welcome, but another part of me wants to think like we shouldn't be thinking in terms inside of the church of here's my middle class and here's my working class, and there's my old boys club over there. Like, so how much do we want to adjust for those criteria when in essence we want to say there is no barbarian and no Scythian, and
right,
yeah. And there's that odd kind of tension there.
Bringing scripture into things, Paul. Come on, we were having a great discussion.
Yeah,
until you had
man. Well, I'm on the left, so
you had to pin us down. Are you?
Well, so being on the left, I thought I'd do something different. Bring some scripture in.
So yeah, Colossians 3. That is important. There is no barbarian, Scythian, slave, or free.
Yeah, but the reality is, of course, there is.
Yes.
That's the tension there, isn't there?
Yes.
Of course, there are those things.
Yeah.
So I'm aware because where I live is predominantly middle class and it is predominantly white.
Yeah.
And I have sat there and thought, like, I wonder what it's like for so and so in the congregation who maybe is like one of the very few black people. Yeah. Or just kind of non-white.
Yeah.
Or from another country, and I kind of thought, I wonder what it is. The person would say, why don't you ask them? But part of me is like, should I make a thing of it? I don't want to make a thing of it. Yeah. In case they're like, well, it didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking,
yeah.
But yet, because in a sense it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be an issue. But in another sense it is.
But you could imagine if you were in charge of that church, you could imagine saying, look, we have a minority of this particular ethnicity in our church, and they're not feeling welcome. And when they look to the front of church, they don't see anybody like them, and they're starting to feel. Would you not then think, let's get them serving in welcome. Let's get them up front.
Yeah,
let's make sure that the worship team, and then you've got quotas. Oh my goodness! And then you're right.
50% of your worship team
50%
must be from a different ethnic group.
But here's why that is different from the state doing something, because church is family.
Yeah.
And the state is not family.
No.
In the church, you are brothers and sisters, and within a family, it's run pretty much on communist grounds, isn't it? Like, family is pretty socialistic.
Yeah, it's socialist, because my kids are literally contributing zero to our household.
Nothing.
In terms of income.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You're being taxed 100%.
They're siphoning it off, though. Right?
Bludgers. But yeah, family is different. Family is run on very different grounds from the state.
Yeah.
And in the state, with the state, you want a rule of law. If you're going to go on holiday this summer, and you're told,
will any of us be able to go anywhere anymore? We'll find out tonight.
What colour passports will we have? Who knows? But if you want to travel, you want to go somewhere that has a rule of law. That's very important. But you don't want to join a family that has a rule of law.
No,
right?
it's a very different thing, isn't it?
You want a rule of love, right? Which is a very different thing, and you belong to each other in very different ways than you belong to the state. And so it's not a direct parallel at all. Right, to talk about what should happen in church and what should happen, and to expect people to use their privilege to serve others is far more appropriate in church, which is a voluntary organization in which you're just called to the way of self-sacrifice in bonds of unbreakable love. That's not, I'm not in covenant with the state,
No.
And so they are very very different things. Should we just finish off a couple of other things on this list? So. Whereas on the left, the state is savior. On the right, the market is savior. Do you have that?
Just on the table again.
Is that on the table? Yeah. So, on the left, here are the dangers. On this table, here are all the dangers on left and right. And on the left, the state is savior. And like, who can deny that when a problem comes up, like in society, that people instantly think, what's the government going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
My big bugbear is always obesity, right? Whenever it turns out that 10-year-olds are more obese than they've ever been.
Yeah.
Instantly we think, what's the government going to do?
The government needs to sort this out. Sugar tax.
A sugar tax.
Sugar tax.
It'll be the sweetest of all taxes.
Yeah.
It's like that's your answer to everything.
We'll just put a tax on it.
What should we do about obesity? I know, a tax.
And it's like, well, and the result is not thin people.
Yes,
it's
just
fat children
fat
who are
government.
poorer.
A fat government.
Yeah, government with more money. Yeah. You're like,
It's like, but it's true. Like, no matter what the question.
But there is that thing there of responsibility. So you will find people going hammer and tong in disagreement over this, won't you? So some people will say, you it's your individual responsibility, or like a parent, whatever. And other people will say, "Oh, it's all the adverts on the telly. It's this. It's them out there putting you. They're just victims."
Right. Right. So some say it's the state, some say it's the market.
Yeah.
Is anyone pointing the finger at themselves or at the family? Right. Is anyone like is there another unity around which we gather? And how absolutely blind and blinkered of us to think that it's either the state or we are just consumers, right? And the market should deal with this. And those are the two idolatries. This is the state or the market. The state or the market.
Yeah.
And so where is the place for the family? Where is the place for church? And because we have rejected church, I think the state is a substitute church.
And that comes up in the discussion, doesn't it? That kind of, the state is a replacement for God in many ways.
Yeah.
Who do we look to in this time of dire need? The government. I mean, hilariously laughable in England for us to be saying that, isn't it? But given our current situation, really, those guys?
Well, we don't. Yeah. But it is the ring of power, though. It's the ring of power that gets bigger and bigger and more powerful. And we keep putting it on different individuals. And we're like, is David Cameron worthy of wearing the ring? He's not! Shock horror! Well, let's try Theresa.
Theresa will take the ring to Mordor.
And then they're like, Boris, would you like to? No. Where's Boris? Where's Boris? Okay, Michael. Anyone seen Michael Gove? No. Theresa's kind of nudged forwards, wears the ring of power, and is deemed, not to be a worthy bearer of the ring. But the whole problem is thinking of the state as the solution in the first place. And like historically it's happened, as the church has shrunk in terms of providing hospitals and charitable care and education, what is it that has picked up the slack?
And I think we've talked about this before, that I partly feel like, so I feel sometimes as Christians that like the church has abdicated its responsibility. So like the whole welfare state growing out of those Christian values, and now there is an official welfare state. It's almost like in the church we've gone, all right, you can have that.
Yeah.
And so there's loads of areas in which, you know, when we're seeing all this, you know, issues of poverty and stuff like that, or things in our area, where even people in the church are saying, oh, the government needs to get on this.
Totally.
And it's like, well, actually, maybe we should just get on it. Maybe it's the church's thing, and maybe that's part of our witness, and we've lost it by looking to the government.
Do you want to hear a controversial opinion?
Absolutely.
We're reading through Proverbs at the moment, and there's all sorts of stuff about putting a guard over your mouth. But okay, I'm taking the guard off. Okay, here's a controversial opinion.
Hang on.
Okay.
In on Glen.
Down, let's go. The idea that food bank picking up the slack of what the state had been doing, the idea that the food bank doing that is an unqualified disaster and terrible. I don't get that, right? As though
Shock.
I said it. But the idea that the only people who should be, you know, caring for the poor, is the state.
Golly,
right?
Shots fired. Flipping heck.
But it's exactly what you just said.
We've
like,
enjoyed having our 11,000 likes for a few months, but bye everybody.
Ben Virgo said, Glen's gone centre left. What's he doing? Not with that comment, I haven't. Not with that comment. And back right. He just said, and back right. Exactly.
Oh, man.
But it's exactly what you're saying.
So we're outraged.
Yes.
So that food banks having to exist.
Yes.
Saying the government should be doing that.
Right.
But particularly as Christians, we should be going, well...
Yeah, whereas the Trussell Trust...
Shouldn't we do that?
Trussell?
I think it's Trussell.
The Trussell Trust. Yeah. Christian, through and through.
Yeah.
Run out of churches mainly. It's Christians stepping up to care for people.
Because I suppose... I'm just pulling this out of nowhere. If you were to go back, I suppose, to the first century where there was no... you know, welfare state for those who are, you know, the orphan and the widow and all those people.
Right.
The people feeding them were the church.
Totally.
And I doubt they would be saying, problem is the Roman Empire should be getting off their bum and sorting this out. I don't think that would have been the cry.
Yeah.
I doubt it would even cross their mind. I mean, obviously,
no,
nothing to base that on. But
no, it wouldn't.
But here we are now, and rather than going, hey, okay, let's do this.
We're
going, government. Like,
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Like to hear it. Roger Marshall has just said, churches can do very little in terms of food banks and solidarity-oriented initiatives without local government support.
Could we, though, if we... Do you think part of the... Because someone... I read a discussion about this, and they were saying, look, the church can never afford to do enough, basically. And is that because... maybe like here in the West, like we're just rubbish givers.
Maybe.
Like financially, like we probably have more than most people in the world.
We give a lot to the government.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and I've heard Christians use that argument.
God only wants 10%.
I've heard Christians use that. I've heard Christians use that argument actually, you know, as well, that like as a church, it's not our role to go and do these things because, well, now we do that, we pay the state to do it.
Right. Well, exactly.
And so we're just doubling up on it.
And it becomes enforced charity, which is a strange concept.
Yeah.
Charity at the point of a gun. So we've had a comment from Sandy Medway. Sandy Medway has flown back from New Zealand just to say, no to food banks, yes to community kitchens where we share a meal and cook for each other.
When she says no to food banks, it is in the sense of just none at all.
I think I would soften what she's saying here in order to say I would prefer there to be community kitchens.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Whereas instead of
rather than just
handing over
here's
a bag,
box of stuff and now we don't see you again.
Yeah.
So it's relational.
Let's sit down and have a meal together.
It's a relational thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a. And actually, I mean, churches can do that to an extent, can't they?
Yeah, and do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and absolutely do that.
I'm not saying you can completely replace the welfare state, but you know,
yeah,
I think we can probably do more. But I think what stops us doing it is often this assumption, like you say, that
it's the government.
Even as Christians, we've fallen into this idea that, well, of course, it's the government's role to do those things.
Right. So there's an idolatry where the state is God, the state is savior, the state is a substitute church. On the other hand, the market is thought by the right to basically solve everything, and as long as we just have untrammeled markets, then it'll all trickle down.
Trickle down. Oh, the joys.
Which, you know.
Well, there's truth in there.
Yeah, there's truth
so
in
that
there.
comes up in the discussion, doesn't it? That,
Massively.
You know, Candace says Russell gets it wrong in that he thinks if someone gets rich, everyone else gets poor. Mm-hmm. And she says, well, you know, the guy who started Twitter, he got rich, but of course he then hired all these people, and they didn't get poorer off the back of it, and Facebook, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And there's truth in that as well. So you know that by having a commodity that you sell and you become prosperous and your business, maybe as a business, you know, it grows and you need to employ people and you
great.
pay more back into the system, and there's a kind of thing like that, and there's a real reality to that. But then I think trickle down economics as well as I've heard, you know, again, Christians talk about trickle down economics, and I think you have to have a naive view of the human heart to think like these people are going to get all the wealth and then pass it on down. So I think there's elements of truth to it, but there's also
And I think the big problem is that there are externalities to businesses, and they are things that cost the rest of society, costs that are not borne by the business itself. So pollution is a key one. So if you have a massive factory and it's polluting the local river, you need a power to come to that like business and say, you got to clean up your act, and here are these taxes, and these are the regulations and that kind of stuff. You need a power above the markets, because the market left to itself will cause all sorts of externalities, cause all sorts of pollution troubles and all sorts of things that get passed on to people without the business actually bearing the cost. And so the market can't be untrammeled, but the state, please, cannot be untrammeled either. What's the next one on the table that we've got there? What have we got? So on the left, the government is our church. So instead of having church, we have the state, and the state tries to do all sorts of things. And the state tries to operate as though it's a church, as though it's family, as though we belong to one another as brother and sister in that. And family is an inherently communist idea, right? And so government starts to be run along those lines. Whereas on the right, not John Stuart Mill, Adam. Oh, come on. Who wrote The Wealth of Nations? Come on, man. Scottish, 1740, The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith. That's it. Adam Smith. He wrote The Wealth of Nations, and he was the first person to kind of observe free market economies at work. And just seeing that if you just leave people to set their own prices and let supply and demand just determine what the price and quantities are, then actually markets kind of tend to form, and it's the most efficient means of production that history has ever known. Right. Just hands off, and there's some kind of invisible hand that seems to kind of order the affairs of businesses, and that's what the market. The market is this incredibly powerful thing. It seems
all hail the market.
All hail the market. All hail the invisible hand. And he was a Scottish Presbyterian, Adam Smith, and you know, it kind of sounds. And he talks about providence with a capital P and that sort of thing. But you know, God becomes providence, becomes the invisible hand, just becomes free for all, right? And we sort of. But the market suddenly becomes God, and we suddenly think, you know, let's just leave economic interests to themselves, and that will be best for society. And that kind of leads to the next duality between left and right. On the left, the cardinal sin is envy, and on the right, the cardinal sin is greed. So we all get on the right, greed. You know, Gordon Gekko, greed is good. You know, let's from Wall Street. Did you get that reference?
I've not seen it.
Okay, Wall Street. So back in the day, and it was all about wealthy traders, and greed will get you where you want to be. And like, do we want to build a society on greed? No, we don't. But then on the left, the cardinal sin seems to be envy. You know, this really came home when I was talking to the Occupy London protesters back in 2011, and they were all camped out around St Paul's Cathedral, and there was one guy with a big placard, and there was loads of Bible there, and all the placards had like biblical comments, and you got talking to people, and there were people there with Bibles, and like King James Bibles usually, and it was very, very, very interesting. People who were very firmly on the left, and really quite Sermon on the Mounty, like all of them, and
So
there's
some Canadian crossover.
We are Sermon on the Mounty. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey. And so I talked to this guy with a placard that said, money is the root of all evil. And I just said, it's interesting, the Bible never says that. And he says, no, it does. It says it in 1 Timothy. And I said, no. The Bible says money is a root of all kinds of evil. And I kind of said, and it's interesting that there is this heart issue about what you desire that's going on in 1 Timothy. We had a look at the verse, and it's about like loving money. It's the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And I said, you can love money without ever having any, can't you? And he had to admit yes, because he'd just been describing the way that there he was, this unemployed guy living in a tent, and every morning he'd look and see all these pinstriped people going off to the city to work as bankers, and he told me about how he daydreamed about their amazing lives. And I was like, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The love of money can be a problem even when you don't have any money. And then he started talking about, but we just need to expropriate the 1% from the wealth from the 1%. And I was like, well, how do you want to expropriate it? He said, well, it would be better if it didn't have to come to war. But if it has to come to war, it has to come to war in order to expropriate the wealth of the 1%. And you're like, what's going on there? Envy, right? That's a politics of envy.
Yeah.
And then he wants the power of the sword in order to enforce the politics of envy. And at that stage, I was like, it doesn't sound very Jesus-y, does it? this guy was, said he was a Christian, but
well, I think we talked a bit about this, that kind of the blindness there of there's the 1%, and I mean there's a distinct irony and hypocrisy in calling out the 1% when you are probably amongst the 10% of the most richest people.
Well, probably the 2%.
Probably more than that. Yeah, just be generous, but people in the world.
Yeah.
And I said about when I was in that secondary school, and I did say something like that to one of the one of the classes, and one of them was absolutely outraged that I could suggest that we're rich.
Right. Right.
No, the rich people are over there.
Right. Right.
And we want to be like them and take their money.
Yes.
Yeah. But we're the poor ones.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Here in your nice middle class suburban area.
Right. And here is where I think there's a lack in both left and right. And one of the big lacks, I think, is gratitude. Like we just don't know how good we've got it. And if you're on the right and it's all about, I'm a self-made individual and I have pulled myself up by my bootstraps, and if I have anything in life, it's because I've done it as an individual, right? Where's the gratitude going to be? You're not going to have gratitude. But on the other hand, if you're on the left and it's all about these oppressors away from me, and I'm not getting what I ought to be getting, and there's the 1% over there, and I don't have what I deserve to have. Again, where's the gratitude?
As part of the, I'm not sure it's one of the 12 steps, but part of Alcoholics Anonymous is they do these gratitude lists. Came up when we were talking about, pray with, Thanksgiving.
Yes.
In everything you do, pray with Thanksgiving. And they would say, people I know who've been through it said they'd have weeks where people would say like, oh, it's really rubbish, whatever. And people would say, when was the last time you did a gratitude list? And they have to write down, I think it's, something like they have to write down 10 things they're thankful for. Yeah. And it forces them to think and go, actually, life is not as bad as I'm thinking at the moment.
Right. Yeah, like 3 good things is a really interesting hashtag both on Facebook and Twitter, and lots of people have benefited from it. At the end of the day, just think of 3 good things that you've been given. And that gets you in touch with the grace that's at the heart of the gospel. But I do think that if we bed down in either right or left, we'll be robbed of gratitude. And then secondly, and I guess lastly, because we probably have to wrap things up, but I just think that bigger vision for the human person, the state is not the biggest highest ideal that we can look to, but the individual is not the highest ideal that we can look to, and economic attainment is not the highest ideal we can look to, and even the family is not the highest ideal we can attain to. What if there is a God who has actually come down and he said to younger brothers, you know, come home and join the joy. Like, I know it was fun in the far country, and it's great that you're so open. I'm happy that you're high in openness, right? But, you know, the human heart is a lot darker than you thought it was, wasn't it? And you need saving from that pit. But then there's the same God from the prodigal son story who says to the older brother, look, you know, it's great that you're hardworking and look at all that you've achieved in the field, but that doesn't make you a family member. That's not what family is about. You know, come home and join the joy. And we've got a God and we've got a gospel that actually addresses both these temperaments and both these wings of the political spectrum. And if we as Christians can kind of embrace that and start to form the communities that Russell Brand was really talking about in the interview, these he seemed to be describing church again and again, you know, Russell Brand, because like he's an anarchist, so he doesn't really believe in the state, right? Yeah. But he kept on talking about these communities that he wants around him, and you're like, Russell, come on home, you know, like, come on home, join the joy, you know. We meet every Sunday morning, and You are very, very much welcome. Because I think there's a lot of wisdom to Russell, actually. At the end of the day.
Oh yeah,
and a lot of a lot of wisdom to Candace as well.
Oh yeah, both very kind of, you know, both people with a lot of good things to say, I think.
Yeah,
and that's why it's so fascinating to see the two of them discuss, and in a way that wasn't, you know, just a slanging match of horror between them, you know. It was so often the case.
A massacre factory.
Yeah.
One of the phrases that Russell came up with. But yeah, so we highly recommend having a look at that interview, and then do have a look at our video about it. It was on YouTube last night.
It'll be on Facebook later today, hopefully.
That's right. And do go and subscribe on YouTube, because we won't always be putting the same stuff on both Facebook and YouTube. So you will miss out if you don't subscribe to YouTube as well as Facebook.
Yeah, so you get everything. Tweet it out to Russell Brand and Candace Owens.
That's right.
Get their attention. Let's get them on the LIVEcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get a
Can we fit them in?
Chat, you know?
Yeah, okay, we can fit them in. That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? Brilliant. Well, thanks for your company, everybody. We've overrun by a few minutes, but thank you so much for joining us. There's been some lively conversation in the comments. We'll get to some of that after we stop broadcasting. But
it's your comment about food banks, wasn't it?
Yeah. I outed
the internet
Sandy.
has imploded.
Brilliant. Well, keep smiling, and
until next week.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye-bye.